So, as we wonder what's going on with our screens, we're going to ask a question. And it's really kind of the question that, it's kind of a statement, honestly. It's, don't forget to remember. Because I think in this year, it's done all kinds of things for us, and it's made us go, there's a lot of things that I want to forget. But when it comes to God and His faithfulness, we need to not forget to remember. And so to begin with, I want to ask you a quick question. How many of these following things do you remember? This first one. Anybody remember those? What are they called? Little People. Little People debuted in 1959. 1959, they came out and they were basically little wooden dolls with plastic heads or wooden heads, and they were wrapped and just looked like little funny looking people, right? Over 2 billion of them have been produced. Okay, if you don't know this one, how about this next one? Anyone remember seeing those on arms? Anyone have them on their arms? Anybody still have them on their arms? Okay, so back in 2006, a guy went to a trade show in China and found these, and in 2008, they gained popularity in the United States, and it peaked in about 2010 when the school said, enough is enough. This is distracting, and schools started to ban silly bands on the wrists of the kids. Okay, how about this next one? Anyone remember this? Okay, Blockbuster Video. How many of you as kids or as adults said, I can't wait to make it a Blockbuster night, right? And so you go and you stand in line with everybody else to get a VHS tape, or if you were really cool, you had that big laser disc, right? Which didn't stay around. But in 1985, Blockbuster opened its doors in Dallas, Texas. And it had a good run, but they forgot how to change, right? So the last Blockbuster store to be open is still open, and it's in Bend, Oregon. And in Bend, it's no longer, they'll rent you some videos, but really what they're doing now is they are on Airbnb, and you can actually have a sleepover in Blockbuster. How cool is that, right? So that's a pretty neat piece of trivia for you. The last one, there were 2 left, and one was in Australia, and the one in Bend. How about this guy? Anyone have one of those? What was it called? Furby. Furby, 1998, Furby came on the scene, and in 1999, the price of Furby went from the $30 retail to over $100, and in some cases, $200, because what do we do, right? Our kids say, I want one, and that's the only thing that'll do, and so we start finding and looking and seeing, and people take advantage, right? And they charge you way more. Okay, how many of you growing up wanted one of these? Anybody know what that is? It's called a roller racer. I wanted one of those things so bad. It's not that I had a driveway that I could ride it on at the time that I wanted it, but those things were so cool. It's kind of like this feat of physics. You sit on it and move the handlebars, and it just kind of snakes along. So that's the early 1980s. Or how about this one, this last one? How many of you had one of those? You know why those came about? Because mom and dad wanted the office chair back, right? What is it about kids that you want to sit down and spin? I mean, all kinds of kids, they do that. They even stand up and spin. And so sit and spin since 1974. I don't know that they actually make them anymore. Do they make them anymore? Yes. They do? Okay. Making kids dizzy since 1974. Sit and spin. All right. So 2020 will be history in just a few days. So the question for you is, what is it that you will remember? And I think if we're being honest, we're going to say, you know what, this past year feels more like a decade, right? It feels like it has just drug on forever. I mean, we've had health issues, pandemic, all of those things. There were natural disasters happening. We had the political landscape that, gosh, it left us rubbing our head. And you know what? I think there's still time, though. We have a couple days left. There could possibly be an alien invasion, right? That's about how this year's going to go. And so if we were going to say anything about 2020, we'd say this. 2020 has been a year of challenges. It's just been a year of challenging the way that we think, challenging the way that we relate, challenging the way that we do life. A shift happened. And that shift, it's going to take us so many years to understand the impact of the shift. Think about how it's changed the way that you church. Some of you are still participating in the way that church shifted to online presence. We shifted the way that we feel about community, the way that we feel interacting with one another. It changed that into that awkward, do I do a fist bump, a handshake, or a quick wave, And we feel that, and it's going to take us a little bit of time to figure out what that actually does to us socially, relationally, as church organizations. How do we adapt? And so adaptability then has become the skill of this year. Or if you're in the business world, it's the pivot, right? It's learning how to pivot and how to make one thing and turn it quickly into another. If we're honest, we say, though, that I like to bring change. How many of you like to bring change into life? You bring a new game into the family game cabinet, right? You bring a new skill into your skill set. You take on a new hobby. Maybe you change a career, you get a new degree, because to be honest, we do like to grow. We like different things. If we didn't like change, we wouldn't buy a new car, right? If we didn't like change, we wouldn't update to the newest phone. We like to grow. We like to see new things. But what we don't like, though, is we don't like for change to disrupt our life. Is that true? We don't like change to disrupt our flow. So we want everything to go as we had expected. But when it acts outside our expectation, that's when it becomes a difficulty. But here's one of the facts about Jesus. Jesus, wherever he went, he brought significant change with him. Wherever he went, everywhere he went, he pushed against what was the norm. What was the norm in the religious circles? What was the norm in the cultural boundaries? Jesus pushed against those things. And he introduced a change in the world that we are still feeling the impact of. He changed the world forever. The disciples found it hard for them to remember the things that Jesus had done. And if you're really being honest, if you and I were sitting down and we were talking across the table and we were talking about your life and the scope of your life, and I asked you a question, do you daily remember the significance that Christ has placed in the events of your life? Or do you forget to remember what Jesus has done? We're okay with remembering the good things, right? We're okay with remembering and to move into the change that mean a benefit for us, just as long, and this is honest, just as long as it doesn't interrupt our plans. Because we've made these plans. We've made this idea of how our life, how our year, how our family, how every relationship that we have should go. And as long as nothing pushes back on it, as long as nothing changes it, we're okay with it. But as soon as it begins to be different, that's where we struggle. And so today we're going to be in Mark chapter 8. If you want to open up your Bibles and find Mark chapter 8. And this is Mark's account, and this is the disciples and Jesus has just fed 4,000 people with 7 loaves of bread. 7 loaves, and they picked up 7 baskets full of pieces of bread. And they go and they have an interaction with the Pharisees, and they go back into the boat. And this is where Mark's account of the feeding of the 4,000 and all of these things converge. We're going to look at Mark chapter 8, verses 14 through 21. And it begins like this. Now, the disciples had forgotten to bring bread. and they had only one loaf of bread with them in the boat. And my first thing is this. Listen, guys, you just had, I think Tina's mic's still on. You just had an interaction with a basket, 7 baskets of bread, and all you could find is one loaf, right? You had 7 baskets, you got one loaf, but they had forgotten to bring the bread. And as he cautioned them, he said, watch out. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod. They're in the boat, they realize they forgot bread, and Jesus says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod. And they hear Jesus speaking about leaven, and their minds immediately go to, who didn't bring the bread? Where's the bread? We just had 7 baskets. Where's the bread? Come on, where did it go? And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. In fact, it probably went a little bit like this. Listen, it wasn't my job to get the bread. It's my job to moor the boat. We have a boat, we're on the boat. It was my job to have the boat ready for us. And I did my job. Whose job was it to bring the bread? Well, it's not my job. I'm kind of keeping track of what's going on. I'm writing things down. I'm making sure that we know what's going on, what has happened. It's not my job. And it went on down the line, and no one understood, no one knew why they didn't have enough bread. Because they were hearing this from Jesus, this beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod. And it brings to mind this reality. And honestly, as you read the Gospels, or at least as I read the Gospels, and I read the responses that Jesus gave to some of the questions or just these off-the-wall statements that he made, a lot of times it brings me to scratch my head and go, gosh, I really don't know why that response came from that question. Or this statement came just out of the blue. Think about it. The first miracle that Jesus performed was at the wedding in Cana, right? And if you recall, it was his mom that said, hey, Jesus, they're out of wine. And what did he say? Yep, I'm going to jump right on that. Let's go. He said, woman, it's not my time, right? Jesus responded to a question that she didn't, or to a statement that she didn't actually make. He said, listen, it's not my time. It's not my time to be the wine poured out for these people. But she was looking at the immediate. She said, there's no wine here at the wedding. So Jesus performed the first miracle, right? That the water to wine. But Jesus was pushing forward, saying that there will be a time when it is my time that my blood will cover sins. So, back on the boat. Jesus, he makes the statement, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod. He makes that statement trying to push these guys to think a little bit further beyond the physical bread that they held in their hands. You're on the boat with the bread, Jesus is saying. You are on the boat with the bread of life. I am the bread of life. He's saying, beware of the leaven that comes and works itself into the batch. Beware of the yeast, that fungus that works its way through. You just put a little bit in, and before you know it, it's all the way through. And he says, listen, this yeast, oftentimes yeast in the scriptures is a metaphor for sin, for pride. Because that works its way through our lives. He says, beware, be careful of the sin, of the pride that comes from religiosity and politics. Ooh. He says, these are places of pride in people, and they're the ones that push you away from the bread of life. Be careful of sinfulness and pride in these areas, because those things will work their way through my body. If we were being honest, not a statement of politics, but of politics in general, it is a dangerous thing when politics works its way into the church. It is a dangerous thing when religiosity is what we are seeking more than the fellowship in the body of Christ. When those things mix in, we don't mix the sin of pride, the sin of religion, and politics into the bread of life. Because Jesus is the one that came to transform. Jesus is the sustaining power, the sustaining fuel for the church. And when we allow other things to mix in, we don't see the transformation that comes through Christ. Because Jesus wasn't talking about the loaves that you carry in your hand. He wasn't talking about provisions. So Jesus, aware of their conversation, says this. And Jesus, aware of this, said, "Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread?" And to that, they scratched their heads a little bit more. They're like, I don't know what to do with this. And Jesus continues, "Do you not yet perceive or understand? Have you not been with me long enough? Have you not spent enough time with me?" Jesus says that, and witnessed so many amazing things. But have you not come to the place where you understand that there is something bigger than food happening here? He says, are your hearts hardened? Are you spiritually dead? Do you resist the movement of God in your life? He says, having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? Have you not seen? Have you not heard everything that I have proclaimed among the people? And Jesus says, and do you not remember? How quickly do you forget? But Jesus says, listen, since we're talking about bread, let's go ahead and have a little recap. Let's sit down. Let's talk about what you've witnessed with your eyes and heard with your ears. Verse 19. When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of broken pieces did you take up? They thought about it. They said, 12. And he said, and the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of pieces of bread did you take up? And they said, 7. And he said to them, do you not yet understand? So let's get to the point. Jesus says, listen guys, here's the point. When you are with me, big things happen. When I am involved, change comes. When I am involved in what's going on in the lives of people, big things happen. Change comes because Jesus has the power to do miracles time and time again. Now, how many of you at hearing this are trying to think back to Sunday school about 5,000, 4,000? I thought it was just 5,000. How many of you knew that there was more than one account of the feeding of the multitudes? 5,000, 4,000. This is good news for someone today because it means that Jesus has the power to do miracles again and again. Think about it. If he's healed you once, he can do it again. If he's opened a door, he can open a door again. It brings us to the point where we say we can remember what God has brought us through. He can do it again. Struggles in our finances. Walking through a pandemic. Difficulties, strained relationships. Our biggest, our hardest times. Jesus has the power to bring you through it. The feeding of the multitudes, it's found in all 4 Gospels. there are two miracles that are found in all four Gospels: the feeding of the multitudes and the resurrection. That means that this is important. And why then is it important? Because it reminds you that Jesus is not only concerned with your soul, hence the resurrection, right? But he is also concerned with your need. He has a concern for your circumstance, for the bills that you're looking at. Jesus cares about your anxiety, your depression. He cares about your soul, and he cares about your need. In fact, one of the things that I think preachers always ascribe to is to be a preacher like Jesus, because Jesus spoke so well, and he spoke and engaged people so much that the people skipped lunch. And I thought we might try it today. What do you think? Is that a laughing of, yeah, let's do it? Jesus had that engaging place where he was able to draw people in and tell them about their deepest needs, their biggest wants, their biggest struggle in their lives. And he did so in such a way that he fed their soul. But Jesus also knew that these folks had a physical need. They needed to be fed. Think about that. It's a message that God cares, and an example to the church that we need to reflect this character of Christ. So let's look at these two miracles, the 4,000 and the 5,000. So if you read the scripture, the line in there says there was 4,000 and 5,000 men, which means there were children and there were women. So you're talking somewhere between 15 and 20,000 people that are getting fed on these two accounts. And that's a lot of people, right? And that's a lot of problems. Because if you've got people, you've got problems, right? We know that. We know that people think it's a joy to deal with us, right? But other people, they have problems, right? Other people, right? But we need to not forget to remember that we, as the church, we're called to people. Because they have problems. And we have problems. Think about what this past year has done for many. For the first time ever, the people that were extreme extroverts had to stay home. The ones that got their energy from being around others, they had to stay home. And they're the ones that were introverts that said, you know what, this is going to be the best thing ever. Said, I don't like being home with myself, right? And that's how we figured out, you know what, it doesn't matter who you are, you have your own problems. And even you can get tired of you. And we have this time that we figured out that problems exist where people are. But our calling as the church is to people, to care for them, to love them, to meet their needs, because this is the reality. God created us to be in relationship with him and with one another. And we need other people in our lives. Even the most extreme introverted person figured out, I actually need people. I need people to know that I am here. I need people to care that I'm here. And so what's interesting, and when Jesus interacted in this feeding of the multitudes, he looked at both of the crowds and he had compassion on them. And the compassion of Christ for the needs of the people, that's what brought the miracle. It's not just a moment of Jesus saying, you know what, I hate what they're going through. I just hate it. I hate it. It's the worst thing ever. And then moving on. He didn't say, I just hope it gets better in their life. He taught us something. That if you have compassion, you have to take action. And that's why I love what Tina shared this morning. Is that compassion requires action. The people in our communities will not see a need met if we don't rise up to help meet that need. Compassion is where care and action collide. It's in the midst of the miracles that we see in these miracles, the 5,000, the 4,000, that the disciples were really good at asking the absolute wrong question. And I want you to know that worry, then, is often the byproduct of asking the wrong question. How many of you have seen a rise in your worried thoughts in the year 2000? Some of you are worried about raising your hand. I get it. In the year 2000, we saw anxiety increase. We've seen depression increase. We've seen this disconnectedness just go off the charts. And worry has a lot to do with it. Worry is the byproduct of asking the wrong questions. In fact, there's a scripture about it, Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, verses 25, and then we're going to skip 31, 33. It says, "Therefore, I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing?" Jesus continues, "Do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? Or what shall we wear?" But Jesus says, "Seek first the kingdom of God and its righteousness, and all of these things will be added to you." So it brings me to this thought. I wonder if the reason that we're worried is because we ask the wrong questions. Because we ask a lot of questions, right? We say, what if? What if 2021 is not better? What if we turn the page on a new year and nothing changes? What if I lose my job? What if the bills continue to pile and I have no ability to pay them? What if I lose my retirement? What if someone sneezes near me? See, we ask a lot of wrong questions. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't walk with wisdom. Yes, we should walk with wisdom through our life, making the best choices with what we have. But the disciples, they asked the wrong question in both feedings. So Jesus, here's what he did. He gave them a better question. Jesus, in both accounts, asked them, "How many loaves do you have?" And that is a powerful question. It reminds you to stop focusing so much on what you don't have. Stop focusing on what you don't have and instead look at what you have right in front of you. The inventory, taking an inventory of everything that is good in your life, everything you have going for you, everything you have around you. Answer the question, what has God already given you? Because the question of how many, how much do you have, does not lead to worry. It leads to work. Make an inventory. Don't let the enemy sell you a lie that you have to focus on the things that you don't have. That you should focus on all of these things that you've lost. Because here's the reality. You're still here. You have your mind, well, most of us, right? You have your creativity. So then, how many loaves do you have? You have plenty of things at your disposal. You have plenty of opportunity at your disposal. You have plenty of resource. You have your mind. You have your friends. You have your church. You have resources at your disposal. But you say, okay, well, hold on. We're talking about bread here, but what about the fish? Remember, there's fish. But I want to point you to something that Jesus never asked for the fish. He only asked for the loaves. And it was in the process of looking for the bread that they found they had fish too. In the process of taking inventory of what God had given them, they found that there was something extra. Think about that in your life. If you were to take inventory of what God has given you, you will find that there's something extra. If we stop complaining about what we don't have, and we start giving thanks for what we do have, being grateful for the things that God has given us, we will find that we have some fish. Something else that's important about this miracle is in the hands of the disciples, the bread that they collected was not enough. 5 loaves, 2 fish, right? 7 loaves. That was not enough to feed the multitudes. But in the hands of Jesus, it was well more than enough. Because when we hold things in our hands, it seems as though there's not enough. I mean, am I the only one that feels that way? That sometimes it feels like there's just not enough. That in my hands, there's not enough. There's not enough hours in the day. There's not enough free space in my brain. There's not enough of anything for me to make a difference. That I'm not enough. That I'm not enough to be the best husband, the best father that I'm called to be. Maybe you're thinking, you know what, it's not enough. I'm not enough to be the mom that I'm called to be, or the business leader, or the teacher. But the fact is, we will never be enough on our own if we keep the power and the resource in our hands and try to keep it under our control and our power. Because in Jesus' hands, it's enough. And in Jesus' hands, you are enough. Because once those things are out of our hands, the miraculous can happen. When it's in your hands, you will try to control it, right? When life's circumstances are in my hands, I try and control it. But the disciples, taking the bread, they give it over to Jesus. Jesus takes the bread, he blesses it. And what does he do? Immediately fills everybody's bellies? No. He gives the bread right back to the disciples. And it's then the miracle of multiplication happened because of the interaction of those that were following Jesus. The multiplication of the bread happened through the interaction. It happened as the disciples took the loaves that Jesus had given thanks for and broken, and they carried it down row by row, person by person, 12 guys, thousands of people. Jesus could have snapped his fingers, and in an instant, the hunger would be gone. But instead, they passed out the bread one by one, and it just kept coming. Bit by bit, it continued to be enough. The compassion led to action and multiplied through interaction. That is outreach. That is missional living. Compassion turned to action in the hands of many through interaction. Jesus was teaching the disciples, and he was teaching us that when we give him everything that we have, he will bless it, give it right back to meet not only our needs, because the disciples got fed too, right? To not only meet our needs, but the needs of many. A couple of more things about the 5,000 and the 4,000. The 5,000, this happened in the Jewish territories. It was a miracle among the Jews. The 4,000, that was in Gentile area. That's very important. Not only was the miracle for the Jews, but it was also for the Gentiles. The issue in the feeding of the 5,000 was, Lord, do you know how much this is going to cost? Right? Lord, did you know there was a price tag to this thing? The issue with the 4,000 was, is there a way that we could possibly get enough? The 4,000 was to show the disciples that Jesus was the bread of life. Not only for the Jews, but also for the Gentiles. And it reminds us that sometimes we forget, because there's only a few months between these happenings, right? Sometimes we forget the faithfulness of God. Jesus, in the feeding of the multitude, said, I'm not just for you, I'm for the entire world. Because here's the reality, everybody is in need. Jesus said that he would use us. Remember that thing called the Great Commission, that he's going to send us out to share the message of Jesus with the whole world, starting with right where we are? In that, he said he would use us to distribute the bread of life to a hungry world. So don't forget to remember, Jesus will meet your need if you place everything you have in his hands. Because you will see him multiply a little through compassionate action and interaction in others' lives. So don't forget to remember that Jesus is the bread of life. Jesus is the bread of life for a world that hungers for God. Jesus is the bread of life for those that fear for their future. Jesus is enough in the midst of crisis, of pandemic, of financial ruin. Jesus is the one that if you hold on to him, if you give him every bit of your resource, every bit of what you have, and say, God, it's yours, he will bring you to understand that he's going to give you enough to make it through this day and through the next and for the one after that. And that bread that he shares with you, you are to share with others. He chose you to be the one that would share bread with the multitude so that they can be filled. So in short, in 2021, don't forget Jesus. Would you pray with me?